This is Political Animals.
Hello everyone and welcome to Political Animals, the news and editorial segment of the Commoners podcast. My name is Adam. For this segment, John and I will be writing and recording separately, bringing you our own opinions and our own voices. This week, John will be bringing you his thoughts on the recent downfall of Milo Yiannopoulos, a rather fitting follow-up to our latest episode of Commoners podcast, so if you haven't had the chance to listen to episode 3 yet, we'd strongly encourage it. But first, the news from Europe. News here continues to be very slow. However, an old ghost of political times gone by has made a reappearance. The now controversial former Prime Minister Tony Blair has made his way back onto the political stage with a speech on, well, what else but Brexit.
Yes, the British people voted to leave Europe, and I agree the will of the people should prevail. I accept right now there is no widespread appetite to rethink. But the people voted without knowledge of the terms of Brexit. As these terms become clear, it is their right to change their mind. Our mission is to persuade them to do so. What was unfortunately only dim in our sight before the referendum is now in plain sight. The road we're going down is not simply hard Brexit. It is now Brexit at any cost. Our challenge is to expose relentlessly what that cost is, to show how the decision was based on imperfect knowledge, which will now become informed knowledge, to calculate in easy-to-understand ways how proceeding will cause real damage to our country, and to build support for finding a way out from the present rush over the cliff's edge. I don't know if we can succeed, but I do know we will suffer a rancorous verdict from future generations if we don't try.
Blair's re-emergence has gone down as well as you might expect as that of a controversial figure, rather divisive. Blair's speech gives a huge boost of energy and emotive drive to those in the country who still believe that Brexit was a mistake and who would like to see a rerun of the referendum. On the other hand, many of his opponents, including many of his own party, have dismissed his comments as undemocratic and lacking in substance. Blair's speech is also being seen as an attempt to reinsert his influence on British politics, again particularly in the face of weak leadership inside the Labour Party. It's influence that no one can ignore. Blair is the only living politician to win 3 consecutive electoral contests and govern for more than a decade. Jeremy Corbyn has of course been light in his opposition to the government's current Brexit plans that will see the UK removed from the EU, the single market, the customs union and the European Court of Justice. Blair makes the case of a true opposition statesman, challenging the preconceived notion of one and done democracy. Vote once and our fate is sealed. Blair may be a man to watch, as rumours of his re-entry into British political life have been floating for the last several weeks, so watch this space. Moving now to the Netherlands. Geert Wilders, a name that you might hear on this podcast over the next few weeks, is the leader of the Dutch Freedom Party, a party dedicated to the removal of Islam from the Netherlands, which includes a ban on immigrants and asylum seekers from Muslim countries, the closing down of mosques, and a ban on the Quran. The Freedom Party is currently topping the polls in the Netherlands for the March 15th elections and is expected to become the largest party in the Dutch parliament. Fortunately, the Netherlands is a multi-party system, and no other party has declared themselves willing to form a government with Wilders, should his party indeed win the top spot. Nonetheless, Wilders launched his election campaign over the weekend in Rotterdam, wherein a speech he gave included these words: "There is a lot of Moroccan scum in Holland who make these streets unsafe. If you want to regain your country, make the Netherlands for the people of the Netherlands again, then you can only vote for one party." Now, there are over 150,000 Moroccan-born residents in the Netherlands who are no doubt anxious to see next month's election results shut Mr. Wilders out of the government. And as a follow-up to this story, The Guardian reported today that Wilders and the Freedom Party have suspended all public election campaigning after an alleged security leak. A member of Mr. Wilders' police security detail has been arrested on suspicion of leaking details of his whereabouts to, well, who else but Dutch Moroccan gangs. Finally, we return to the UK, where just this hour polls have closed in the Stoke-on-Trent Central and Copeland by-elections. By-elections are held when sitting MPs vacate their seats in Parliament. Both seats have been held by Labour, Stoke specifically since 1950. But tonight might be a rough night for the left-leaning party. Again, weak leadership from leader Jeremy Corbyn has left Labour unable to define its stance on Brexit, with the party's two main bases split between remaining in the EU and leaving the EU. Both seats being contested tonight are in heavy Leave areas. With strong Conservative Party handling of Brexit, will voters actually back the government party? Will the right-wing party, UKIP, make any headway and take votes from Labour? Or will it split the working class vote and hand victory to the Tories, to the Conservatives? Do we have Adam from the future to tell us of these election results? Nope, apparently not. By the time you're listening to this, results should have been announced, so if you are interested in the outcome of these by-elections, do a quick Google search and see who's won. Last I heard, it looks like the Conservatives could take one seat in Copeland, and Stoke could remain in Labour hands. But we'll see what the outcome is. That's all from Europe this week. John, is over to you, Milo, and the news stateside.
Thank you, Adam. I'll begin this week once again with a science story that I find incredibly interesting. I hope that you'll indulge my inner nerd for a minute before we get to the more heavy-hitting news from the United States. Astronomers have discovered a promising solar system just 39 light-years from Earth. Many astronomers believe this will be the best place to begin the search for life or even habitable worlds outside of our own solar system. The system is centered around an ultra-cool dwarf star called TRAPPIST-1 and contains 7 rocky Earth-like planets. 3 of the planets orbit in what's called the Goldilocks zone, a region around the star where temperatures would potentially allow liquid water and atmospheres to form on the planet's surfaces. This makes them prime targets in the search for extraterrestrial life. Further observation is needed to determine whether these planets do indeed have the key elements in their atmospheres, such as water, methane, oxygen, or carbon dioxide, which scientists consider biosignatures. Luckily, the system is fairly close to us, at only 39 light-years away. Though this might seem like a vast distance for humans to travel, the newfound solar system will be well in range of the James Webb Space Telescope, which will be able to easily detect atmospheric components and heat signatures indicative of life after it launches in 2018. Although it is far too early to make any pronouncements about the likelihood that these planets are habitable, science enthusiasts like myself cannot help but get excited at the prospect. Speaking of habitable planets, it seems that the Republican administration is intent on destroying our own space rock. In a discovery that will not come as a surprise to many, emails showing a cozy relationship with the fossil fuel industry have surfaced from the new Environmental Protection Agency head Scott Pruitt's time as Oklahoma Attorney General, according to the Washington Post. The emails highlight an often chummy relationship between Pruitt's office and Devon Energy, a major oil and gas exploration and production company based in Oklahoma City. The correspondence makes clear that top officials at the company met often with Pruitt or people who worked for him. Devon representatives also helped draft and redraft letters for Pruitt to sign and send to federal officials in an effort to stave off new regulations. The emails show that Pruitt and his office were in touch with a network of conservative groups, many of which in the past have received backing from the billionaire brothers Charles and David Koch, the libertarian owners of Koch Industries, a major oil company. The documents detail not only how Pruitt's office at times coordinated with industry officials to fight unwanted regulations from Washington, but also how he was a highly sought-after speaker at conferences and other gatherings for groups such as the American Legislative Exchange Council, which works with corporate interests in state legislatures to shape key pieces of legislation. Though the emails show Pruitt's ties with a wide range of fossil fuel interests and conservative political groups, they also show a particularly friendly working relationship with officials from Devon. Most of the correspondence revolves around arranging speaking arrangements, obtaining contact information for people at the Federal Office of Management and Budget, and coordinating letter-writing efforts. Pruitt's close ties to Devon Energy were first highlighted in 2014 by the New York Times, which reported that a letter ostensibly written by the Attorney General alleging that the EPA overestimated air pollution from natural gas drilling was actually written by the company's attorneys. That's actually called representative government in my view of the world, Pruitt later said of the letter. The email's release comes just days after Pruitt was confirmed as the EPA's new leader. Senate Democrats and environmental groups made a last-minute push to delay his confirmation vote last week, contending that lawmakers and the public ought to be able to review his correspondence with industry officials before putting him in charge of safeguarding the nation's environment. Republicans forged ahead anyway, and Pruitt was confirmed by a 52-46 vote. It seems unlikely that Pruitt will move to curtail the fossil fuel industry as head of the EPA, an issue of obvious concern to those worried about the long-term effects of man-made climate change on the planet. According to documents released by the Department of Homeland Security, President Trump has moved to aggressively enforce immigration laws, seeking to arrest and deport anyone in the country illegally, even if they have not committed a crime. The New York Times reports. In the documents released on Tuesday, the Department of Homeland Security is directed to begin the process of hiring 10,000 immigration and customs agents, expanding the number of detention facilities, and creating an office within immigration and customs enforcement to help families of those killed by undocumented immigrants. The directives would also revive a program that recruits local police officers and sheriff's deputies to help with deportation, effectively making them de facto immigration agents. The effort, called the 287G program, was scaled back during the Obama administration. The program faces resistance from many states and dozens of so-called sanctuary cities, which have refused to allow their law enforcement workers to help round up undocumented individuals. In New York, Mayor Bill de Blasio, in a statement on Tuesday, pledged the city's cooperation in cases involving proven public safety threats, but vowed that what we will not do is turn our NYPD officers into immigration agents. Under the new directives, the agency will no longer provide privacy protections to people who are not American citizens or green card holders. A policy established in the last days of the Bush administration in January 2009 provided some legal protection for information collected by the Department of Homeland Security on non-residents. The new policies also target unauthorized immigrants who smuggle their children into the country, as happened with Central American children seeking to reunite with parents living in the United States. Under the new directives, such parents could face deportation or prosecution for smuggling or human trafficking. This, in conjunction with the order to construct a border wall, seems to be a continuation of President Trump's effort to come through on key promises he made during his campaign in relation to illegal immigration. It is unclear how long it will take for the new rules to take effect. A new poll released by Quinnipiac reveals that President Trump's approval rating has fallen to 38%. According to the poll results, only 38% of Americans approve of Trump's job performance thus far, while 55% disapprove. Not surprisingly, the responses were mostly split along party lines, with 83% of Republican respondents approving of the president, while 91% of Democrats disapproved. On Wednesday, President Trump announced that the Republican alternative to the Affordable Care Act would be forthcoming as soon as early to mid-March. Very little is known about the details of such a plan, although early indications are that the proposal will center around tax breaks and credits aimed to help defray the cost of purchasing private health insurance. The Republicans face many pitfalls in replacing the new law. Many people, including many Republicans, are in favor of keeping key features of the ACA, such as required coverage for those with pre-existing conditions. It is unlikely that a plan focused on tax credits without subsidies could guarantee coverage of pre-existing conditions while also controlling costs, without going back to the very unpopular policy of high-risk pools. Also on Wednesday, the Republican administration rolled back federal guidelines that allowed transgender students to be able to use the bathroom that corresponds with their gender identity. The administration believes that the issue is one that is best left up to the states without interference from the federal government. The move drew harsh criticism from civil rights and pro-LGBT groups who cite the past failures of states to adequately protect civil rights on their own without federal intervention. Milo Yiannopoulos is back in the news after video surfaced of the controversial figure defending certain sexual relationships between men and boys. Yiannopoulos, who was permanently banned on Twitter, was disinvited as a speaker at CPAC, he had his book deal with Simon Schuster pulled, and ultimately he resigned as an editor at Breitbart News due to the controversy. Bill Maher, who faced criticism for hosting Yiannopoulos on his show last week, seemed to take credit for Milo's downfall. In an interview with the New York Times, Maher said, quote, "We had Milo on despite the fact that many people said, 'Oh, how dare you give a platform to this man?' And by the end of the weekend, by dinnertime Monday, he's dropped as a speaker at CPAC, then he's dropped by Breitbart, and his book deal falls through. As I say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. You're welcome. Not surprisingly, many on the left and right enthusiastically welcomed Milo's downfall. Which actually leads me to today's editorial. Should we, as liberals, take gleeful pleasure in the personal destruction of our political enemies? Listeners of our podcast will know my feeling on letting Milo speak, but what about now? What about when his words bring about his own destruction? Should we celebrate this and participate in it? I actually have a lot to say about this, but first I think we need to review what actually happened. Back in 2016, Milo appeared on the Drunken Peasants podcast. The conversation turned to the subject of the age of consent, when Milo said the following.
And I think the law is probably about right. That's probably roughly the right age. I think it's probably about okay. But there are certainly people who are capable of giving consent at a younger age. I certainly consider myself to be one of them. People who are sexually active younger. I think it particularly happens in the gay world, by the way. And in many cases, actually, those relationships with older men. This is one of the reasons I hate the left. This sort of stupid, one size fits all policing of culture. This arbitrary,
Milo.
This arbitrary.
Let him talk.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll be quick. This arbitrary and oppressive idea of consent, which totally destroys, the understanding that many of us have of the complexities and subtleties and complicated nature of many relationships. People are messy and complex, and actually, in the homosexual world, particularly, some of those relationships between younger boys and older men, the sort of coming-of-age relationships, the relationships in which those older men help those young boys to discover who they are and give them security and safety and provide them with love and a reliable and sort of a rock where they can't speak to their parents. Some of those relationships are some of the most
molestation to me. It sounds
well,
like
you know what?
It sounds like Catholic priest molestation to me.
And you know what? I'm grateful for Father Michael. I wouldn't give nearly such good head if it wasn't for him. No. You're misunderstanding what pedophilia means. Pedophilia is not a sexual attraction to somebody 13 years old who is sexually mature. Pedophilia is attraction to children. To children who have not reached puberty. Pedophilia is attraction to people who don't have functioning sex organs yet, who have not gone through puberty, who are too young to be able to understand the way their bodies. That is not what we're talking about.
And culture.
Granted. You don't understand what pedophilia is if you think that I'm defending it, because I'm certainly not. And I think particularly in the gay world and outside the Catholic Church, if that's where some of you want to go with this, I think in the gay world, some of the most important, enriching, and incredibly, life-affirming, important, shaping relationships, very often between younger boys and older men, can be hugely positive experiences for those young boys. They can even save those young boys from desolation, from suicide,
consensual.
from drug addiction.
Hold on.
All sorts of things. Provided they're consensual.
These were the comments that brought him down. It almost seems odd that this was the straw that broke the camel's back. None of his other comments caused this level of backlash. There's an uncomfortable truth that we need to come to terms with, I think, on the left. For instance, Milo hardly seems to be the only prominent figure who has made comments supporting relationships between young children and adults. For instance, Bill Maher himself defended Mary Kay Letourneau, a 35-year-old teacher who had sex with a 14-year-old boy.
The cover, Mary Kay Letourneau, the teacher from Seattle, who is in jail because she is in love. That's how I view it. I admit that it's unorthodox. She is 35. The boy is 14. He was younger when started. But the big story this week.
Has he been bar mitzvahed?
Have I?
No, is he?
Oh. Okay. But she is pregnant again. That was the story this week. With the second child by this boy. So basically they're having a family and they're keeping the mother in jail because she won't conform to what society feels should be the perfect American family.
Yeah, it's perfect. My dad's 14-year-old older than me.
Absolutely sickening.
What is sickening?
A woman who's over 20 years older and she raped this kid.
Raped?
Well.
Come on. She forced? How do you know? And how can you?
Well, how do you know that she didn't rape him?
How can a woman
know that she didn't seduce him?
How can a woman rape a man?
Former Star Trek star George Takei also spoke glowingly about his own experience having sexual relations with an older man when he was 14.
So you go on, you remember the blonde forearm.
Yes.
And how did he seduce you?
Well, he started touching me and
I mean, wait a minute. Did he came into your cabin?
Yes.
You two were alone?
Yes.
He sits down next to you on the bed?
Yes.
How were you alone at summer camp?
We were in the cabin.
And where were the
Everybody else
boys?
was out?
Where were the other boys?
They were off hiking or something, or something
Doing
was
little
happening.
boy things.
Somehow you managed to stay behind.
Yes.
Do you think subconsciously you stayed behind because you wanted to be alone with him?
No. There was some kind of reason why I had to be there, and he was.
You were on your period?
He was going to teach me something.
Oh,
Right.
yes, he was.
And you sat there and he touched you, and
He
did you
touched
feel
me and,
did you feel
felt
molested in a way?
What?
Were you molested in a sense because you were 13?
because I was kind of
willing.
I thought he was pretty attractive.
Right.
And he was.
And you wanted to know why you felt this way.
Yeah.
Critically acclaimed director Roman Polanski drugged and anally raped a 13-year-old girl. Bill Clinton routinely used his position of power to take advantage of younger women. All these people have something in common. They were all celebrated liberals. I ask you, where is the outrage about these words and actions? Where is the gleeful army of torches and pitchforks to ensure that these people are ruined professionally and personally? Why has it become acceptable to joyfully embrace the personal downfall of those we disagree with politically? Let me be clear, I am not defending Milo's words. As a father of two beautiful young girls, I find any sexual relationship between adults and children to be abhorrent. However, I do think I understand where Milo is coming from. At the time, Milo was discussing his personal experience with sexual abuse, and his flippant remarks seemed to me to be a coping mechanism. In light of his other political views, it's easy to forget here that Milo is a victim of childhood abuse. By his own admission, he views himself as a willing participant in that abuse. To me, these are the hallmarks of a wounded person trying to justify horrible things that have happened to them, by trying to cast himself as in control of the situation. It's also not uncommon for people with deep-seated emotional issues to use dark humor to cope with the pain that they've experienced. Perhaps I can sympathize with his words because I too was sexually abused at a young age. My experience was nothing close to Milo's, and I am not a homosexual, but at some level, I feel as though I have an understanding of the motivations behind his words. I was relatively lucky. The abuse I suffered was only inappropriate touching by a trusted older man, not actual sex, and it was only one time and not repeated instances. But even with this minimal exposure to abuse, for years I dealt with self-doubt, wondering constantly if it was my fault. How much easier it would have been for me to cast myself as in control, as if it wasn't abuse, as if it had been my choice. I don't condone Milo's words. I think they are irresponsible. Words like his could potentially make other victims feel like the abuse was not a bad thing. Hearing him speak glowingly of his relationship with his abuser could cause others to feel wrong for not having that same relationship. But while I don't support Milo's words, neither do I support the wholesale campaign against him. I have argued that we must always follow our principles, even if it leads us to uncomfortable actions. With the examples I mentioned earlier of equally abhorrent words, or even worse, actions, by liberals that have been largely ignored, I find it hard to believe that the attacks on Milo are being launched on principle. If we are only willing to call out and attack those with whom we disagree politically, we are merely playing for a team. There is no principle. I believe the left is faced with a choice. Either we need to be consistent in our outrage and call these things out wherever we see them, even if we like that person, or we should not take part in ruining people's lives over their words. Unfortunately, it seems like we do not hold ourselves to either of those standards. I do understand that the feeling of schadenfreude is very real. Many might view it as karma or the chickens coming home to roost when people like Milo crumble. The temptation to pile on and make the destruction complete is quite strong. But I fear what type of world we will live in if we give in to that temptation. I'm a firm believer in the Kantian categorical imperative. Before you do something, imagine what the world would be like if everyone always did that same thing every time they had the opportunity. What sort of world would we have if any time someone said anything off color, or even something we believe to be abhorrent, we actively tried to ruin their career or personal life? It would be the ideal world for ideologues who demand purity, but we cannot forget that people are indeed messy and complicated. We also must understand that the standard we set should be acceptable to us were the roles reversed. To many right-wing conservatives, the things I say might seem dangerous. If we make it acceptable to witch hunt people based on their political affiliations, when the tables are turned, we may be the next in line to be burned at the stake. It's also important to remember that Milo is just a man. You can destroy him, but you cannot destroy his ideas. If anything, the display that we have seen over the last week will make his followers even less likely to listen to you when you talk to them and try to convince them otherwise. These are the reasons that I personally don't celebrate Milo's downfall, and I will not participate in it. In my estimation, what he said was wrong. It certainly is true that he has spent the last several years digging the grave he now lies in, but I take no pleasure in watching the funeral. If you liked today's episode, don't forget to follow us on Twitter @CommonersPod. The music for today's episode is Drive by Otis McDonald. See the description for a link to the rest of his work.